Woke Supremacy News.
Stimme ab. Wenn ja, dann tritt für mich ein, so wie ich für dich eingetreten.
That is a video where Biden, of course, is Hitler, if you're not understanding the historic reference there, that was shared by Marjorie Greene. Marjorie Greene, of course, is a part of the Republican Party, a party that is spending all of today saying that declaring them semi-fascists or a potential threat to democracy is out of bounds, but turning Joe Biden into Hitler and spreading that on social media is apparently fully acceptable. That doesn't honestly even stand out from other right wingers. They are losing their ever-loving minds over this Biden speech. Here's a little mashup for you.
The Republican Party today is dominated, driven, and intimidated by Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans. And that is a threat to this country.
Yeah, they're a threat, says the guy with the blood red Nazi background and Marines standing behind him.
The imagery there was almost satanic with that blood red lighting and the two Marines behind him. It was just insane.
The idea he would give such a massively partisan speech that degraded half of the country in the eyes of the world, I don't know any Democrat that can stand by that and say that that was okay.
This speech is easily the most disgraceful speech from a president in recent decades. It is horrifying how he is issuing a call to war against every single American who didn't vote for him.
President Biden tonight gave the speech of a dictator in the style of a dictator, in the visual of a dictator, using the words of a dictator. This was his enemies of the state speech. And like every other radical Marxist tyrant, he accused his opponents of being fascist while he engages in repressive authoritarian behavior.
I think that baby Voldemort's got a good point there. No, it's ridiculous. If it sounds like they did not listen to the same speech as you, it's because they didn't listen to the speech. Let's be very clear about that. They weren't actually responding to it. Tucker Carlson, while he's up next to me, led off his show saying, we're gonna dive deep into Biden's speech, and then went more than half of the runtime not playing a single second of it. He had thoughts about it, but he literally was not watching it. It was being broadcast while he was live, and yet he had many thoughts about the speech that he wasn't actually listening to. These are, of course, all right-wing commentators that sat happily by for all of these debate performances, campaign speeches, and rallies from Donald Trump, mocking the physically disabled, pitching all Democrats as horrible people, and then not just saying things, but doing things, actually working to strip away rights, putting religious ideologues on the Supreme Court, having as your only domestic infrastructure goal the creation of a multi-billion-dollar wall to keep out the people you label illegals casually. So spare me, honestly, the supposed tears. Stephen Miller would have loved every bit of that if it had been delivered by Trump. It just wouldn't have had any of the sting of actually identifying a true threat to democracy in that case.
Yeah, I think half the people in those clips know, of course, that they're playing games, and Stephen Miller said one thing that is true. He said, look, the oldest trick for people who want to be authoritarian is to call their opponents what they are, which is ironically exactly what he was doing in that appearance. He was an integral part of Donald Trump's presidency, and he pushed a fake elector scheme, which would have literally done a coup against our democracy. He pushes for an authoritarian leader in Donald Trump, and then he says, oh, look, Biden's doing it. And then he tells you his own strategy as if Biden believes it, right? So that was really meta. But I think half of them, guys, are genuinely shocked. And I know why. Because right-wingers have a sense of entitlement in this country. That Democrats and the left are not allowed to fight back. That they could say anything they want about Democrats. They could say that they're child molesters and they're baby killers and criminals and rapists and the worst people. They could say anything, the most outrageous things about Democrats. But if a Democrat ever says anything about Republicans, they go, oh my God, they have offended half the country. Well, how about when you were calling half the country baby killers and all the other unbelievable things you've said over the last 40 years? they feel like, no, I have a right to do that. I have a right to punch you in the face, but you don't ever have a right to talk back to me because I'm in charge.
Yep.
Now, super sad day for the right wing. No, you're not. We do get to talk back to you. You're not the boss of us. And they've gotten smug and used to that entitlement because Democrats have not fought back in 40 goddamn years. When Biden half fights back, this is not a majority of Republicans are wonderful people. The majority of Republicans, my ass, they're wonderful people. They're awful people, right? But he says the majority are good, but less than half are problematic because they just try to overturn our democracy. And they're like, this is the most divisive speech in decades. You never saw Donald Trump's speech? They're just amazing.
To watch them try and brand run-of-the-mill neoliberal democracy as fascism, which might be something that would be kind of easy to do if we were living in a country where most people were to the left of neoliberal democracy. But when we have actual fascists on the far right, by comparison, it's not so easy to do. But I bet people will watch these news segments, not watch the speech, and just believe them at their word. And that's really scary. It's not really about the lighting in the speech. They're trying to frame Biden as an authoritarian leader because he says he's going to uphold elections and make sure that public resources sometimes go to things that benefit people and sometimes regulate corporations. And to us on the actual left that want to see the actual will of the people reflected in their government, the speech doesn't go far enough, and that's very clear. And it's very run-of-the-mill neoliberal democracy to the point that he's still calling the United States a democratic experiment and we're the country that's a beacon on the hill. And he makes a point to very clearly call out political violence, which is the same rhetoric that they pushed during the Black Lives Matter movement. We know that in the United States, we've had a lot of one-sided state violence, and when people stand up to that, things like the destruction of property is framed as terribly violent revolutionary behavior, when in reality it's a response to people being murdered by the state. So Biden's speech was not terribly far right. It was pretty much down the middle, calling for unity by just saying, we need to actually have fair elections, not making any big, bold promises other than to transition to renewable energy, but that wasn't really backed with any details of the plan. So it's insane to watch them brand this speech as extremist when it is the most purely centrist thing I've heard in a long time.
Yeah, and when we respond with like, have they been listening to Donald Trump? You might come away, if you haven't been following every step along the way, that, oh, so they're saying that I guess everybody does it. That's very clearly not what we're saying. What Biden is doing is not throwing substance-free slurs at the other side. He's identifying the actual intent of this movement on the right. They do want to end democracy. Perhaps not via coup next time, that would be nice. But they definitely want your vote to not actually count for anything, even less than it does now. That is actually true. When Donald Trump stands on the stage and appeals to the QAnon crowd, or has his crowd chant "lock her up" about conspiracy theories about Hillary Clinton, that is not the same thing as accurately describing what a political movement is trying to accomplish. So this is not whataboutism. They are very different things. But I want to give you just a couple more responses to it. It came not just on Fox News. Ben Shapiro, who has always been a very big critic of Trump when he goes too far, tweeted, "That was the most demagogic, outrageous, and divisive speech I have ever seen from an American president. I apologize if I'm not really selling the Ben Shapiro thing. Imagine that I've slowed it down by about 2 times. Joe Biden essentially declared all those who oppose him and his agenda enemies of the republic. Truly shameful." No, he didn't do that, and he didn't do that because you said essentially. And the reason you wrote essentially in your tweet is because you know that Donald Trump literally called groups in America the enemy of the people hundreds of times, and you never raised a single objection to it. Thus the flaccid essentially in your tweet. But Donald Trump also posted about it, not on Twitter because he's not allowed on there, and that remains fun to this day, saying, "If you look at the words and meaning of the awkward and angry Biden speech tonight, he threatened America, including with the possible use of military force. He must be insane or suffering from late stage dementia, and might I add, person, woman, man, camera, TV." Yes, he's threatening with military force. I mean, come on, do we seriously have to respond to Whether Biden was threatening to deploy the military against the American people, that isn't actually what he was doing. Now, Donald Trump frequently fantasized about putting the military in the streets, whether for ostentatious North Korean-esque military parades or to crush social justice protests. Again, it is all projection, undiluted.
Dark Jackson.
Oh, we have a Jackson here.
So what I'm seeing from all the right wing is them basically saying, how dare they fight back? Don't they know their place? They're supposed to just have us pummel them and just sit there and take it and tell America how great we are. No, sorry. For the first time, Joe Biden hasn't done that. That's what he normally does. But he gave a speech that went a quarter of the way to being honest. And guys, look, when we talk about threat to democracy, so look, a couple of the commentators there that you saw with your own eyes, and then Donald Trump talked about a call that Biden was doing, a call to war, and he threatened to use military force. Did he actually say any of that in the speech? Absolutely not. You can watch the speech for yourself. You see that. There's none of it. It's just totally made up. But it is what we talked about earlier. It is projection, right? So they want, Donald Trump literally said, go down to the Capitol. When he heard that his own vice president might be murdered, he said he didn't mind. So there's been a literal call to violence from Trump over and over and over again. Lindsey Graham talking about how there's going to be riots in the streets if you dare hold Trump accountable, etc. They're obviously projecting. And did we always say that Donald Trump was a threat to democracy? Like, that we say it, to John's point, that we say it without substance, just like they say it without substance? Absolutely not. Go back and see during the 2016 election when I definitely wanted Trump to lose. And I did 100 loser Donald segments. Did I ever say that he was a threat to democracy? No, you know why? Because at that point, I didn't know he was a threat to democracy. I just thought he was an incompetent, evil, stupid, immoral guy, okay? That shouldn't be anywhere near power. But I didn't think he wasn't gonna leave office, that he was gonna ask his crowd to do a riot, maybe hang his vice. I didn't think any of that, because I hadn't seen an inclination towards that. Now we see it, so you actually point out facts. Facts matter, they matter. But CNN will tell you now, because they have a new Republican owner, a 50-50, I can't tell. And in fact, they did do that. Several different people today on CNN talking about, oh, Biden's gone too far. He's such a meanie. I can't believe he's doing that. So it's absolutely absurd. And the talk about enemies of the state, they're kind of rubbing it in your face that they're liars. So both Trump and Stephen Miller, you talking about, especially Stephen Miller in that clip that you saw, he knows, he wrote the lines about Democrats and media being enemies of the state when he was writing for Donald Trump. So he goes on there and winks to the people who know, but he knows the audience doesn't know anything because they've been brainwashed by right-wing media and they don't know a goddamn thing. So he goes, oh, Biden is calling for his opponents to be enemies of the state. Wink. Oh, that is so bad. Wink. I can't believe they're offending your feelings. Wink. But the audience doesn't know he's winking. They really think, because this is the only thing they're seeing. If you watch Tucker Carlson's segment, remember his entire audience is 100% brainwashed. You would have thought that it was Hitler's speech and that Biden was saying, I'm going to come. And he made it seem like the Biden was going to send soldiers to your house and maybe even attack you, physically attack you. They think that Biden's about to march in the goddamn streets with the military. And by the way, what happens at the end of right-wingers thinking that? They grab their guns.
Super last thing. I would say comparatively globally, Americans have been pretty comfortable. We haven't had relative political instability. And the idea that we could become the kind of country where democracy fails and we are terribly politically unstable to the point that there's violence in the streets scares a lot of Americans. Not only that, Joe Biden in this speech pointed out how the right has taken many of our basic rights and freedoms away via their control of the Supreme Court. And so what mainstream media, especially Fox, is trying to do here is get people to not watch the speech because they don't want people to hear those narratives. They are afraid. But I think it could backfire because they're saying all of this crazy stuff about what happened in the speech, but the clips don't reflect any of that crazy stuff happening. So they're effectively teasing the speech, and more people might end up actually tuning into the speech because of it.
Yeah. That's also true. Yes, super last thing. Tucker Carlson also told you that the people at the George Floyd protests were gonna march into your house and pull you out of your beds. He said the same thing effectively about the mandatory vaccination squads that were gonna come around. They just keep saying it and they keep gobbling it up.